classified materials next to your Corvette? What were you thinking?
Let me, I'm going to get a chance to speak on all this, God willing, soon. But as I said earlier this week, people, and by the way, my Corvette's in a locked garage. Okay? So it's not like you're sitting out in the street. But at any rate.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Classified documents next to the Corvette. Joe Biden, that is the lead story. It will be the story all weekend, all next week. Special counsel for Joe Biden looking into whether or not he violated criminal law in taking and sealing away in a Corvette garage his classified document that he wanted, plus the other documents that we found at the Biden Center, which was co-located with, I have read, I don't know for sure, a Chinese company that, of course, would be answering to the Chinese Communist Party. Something for Congressman Gallagher on the Gallagher Committee perhaps to look into. That is the big story. Joe Biden's papers troubles, the same as Donald Trump's papers troubles. My personal take, neither of them ought to be criminal matters. Neither of them should have been reviewed by the Department of Justice. They ought not to have raided Donald Trump's house. They ought not now to be roasting Joe Biden on the spit, because every single government official I've ever known ends up with stuff they ought not to have taken under the Presidential Records Act. And the least of them all is Donald Trump, because Donald Trump had classification, declassification authority. I'd like to know if there's a grand jury impaneled on the Biden matter. I'd like to know if witnesses have been called from Penn. I would like to know a bunch of other things, because what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. We'll come back to, let me do a little bit of other news before we focus in on that, because there is other news, terrible news. Tornado storms across the United States South last night. 6 people are confirmed dead in a large tornado that ripped into Alabama. Selma, Alabama, in particular, devastated. More searching going on this morning, and devastation pictures are arriving. It's truly terrible. Lisa Marie Presley died, singer and daughter of Elvis Presley, one of the famous kids of famous people. Google filed a brief at the Supreme Court yesterday saying a case that wants to attach liability to Google by the family of a victim of ISIS, because Google's YouTube videos allowed ISIS to spread. Google says, woe is us if this case goes forward. You know, that case is going to go forward. Big Ten lost its great commissioner, Kevin Warren, to the NFL Chicago Bears before he got the expansion completed. I think you all know that the Big Ten should include Colorado, Stanford, University of Oregon, and University of Washington. It's all about media markets, but we'll come back to that. And it appears that the United States, along with other Western powers, are about to send our modern tanks to Ukraine. I think we're using Ukraine now as sort of a weapons testing lab, and it's turning out that our weapons are better than the Russian weapons by a lot, and we're training more troops. Now to the audio. I really don't know where to begin, because, you know, let's start, in fact, with Kamala Harris at the White House yesterday, because this is the backup plan if President Biden throws it in because he doesn't like the special counsel. Cut number 11.
But among the many things, I'm excited about electric school buses. I love electric school buses. I just love them for so many reasons. Maybe because I went
all right,
to
so I thought maybe her comms department had told her, like they told President Biden, don't whisper, that they told Kamala, leave the electric school bus stuff out because it makes you look like a moron. And they didn't tell her that. So that was going on at the same time that Joe Biden had his press conference. The press conference comes up with, you know, these classified documents are here, there, and everywhere. There have been 3 discoveries, all right? Not 2, not 1. And they were all known before the election, but nobody told the American people. What a surprise. What a surprise. But at least Merrick Garland did the right thing, appointed a special counsel. That fellow, Robert Hur, good lawyer, good prosecutor. I doubt they're going to file charges against him. I really do. But the regulations had to be applied. I've been saying that all week. You may call me a prophet or the son of a prophet, because I've been saying there's no way out here. They appointed a special counsel for classified documents with Donald Trump. What they didn't do, though, is a search of President Biden's home. And if they're in the garage, why should we believe they're not in the den? And why should we believe they're not at the beach house in Rehoboth? I just don't know. I'd like to know. I'd like to have the Attorney General of the United States, but he's a little bit doddering too, answer some questions. Let's listen to Jonathan Turley on Fox with Martha McCollum yesterday after this about the problem the president faces over these documents. Cut number 9.
Well, I think that the timeline for the Biden documents is really increasingly intriguing. You know, his counsel said this was an inadvertent misplacement of documents, but this was not a one and done problem. Presumably, all these documents were in the group of documents removed from the executive branch when Biden left as vice president. That was in 2017. The Penn Biden Center didn't open its office in D.C. Until 2018, so he had to move in after that date. So these documents had to go to some other location. Now the question is, why were they divided? They end up in different places. Some end up in D.C., some end up at his residence. In his residence, some end up in the garage. So these documents were distributed and divided. Why? What was the purpose of sending one box to D.C. or having one box stay in?
Distributed and divided, and why haven't we had a search of the Rehoboth Beach House? Because they're probably there. They're probably at the Delaware Mansion. They're probably at the University of Pennsylvania offices. Again, it's Joe Biden keeping what he wants. It's like Donald Trump kept what he wants because that's what they do. And then eventually the NARA collects them after they write their books. Here's the entire exchange. I don't play much Karine Jean-Pierre because it's so painful. But here it is yesterday, cut number 4, her exchange with the press.
Thank you, Karine.
Thank you.
We are seeking information, and I appreciate and understand why the press office can only say so much. So help us understand this. Who are the president's personal counsel that the Attorney General referred to today?
I was asked that question earlier. Let me get back to you. I actually don't have that answer. I think I know who it is, but I want to make 100% clear.
Bob Bauer is one, potentially Dana Remus, James Garland, Robert Leno. Are they the ones that have been contacted in the Justice Department?
Look, again, I don't want to. I want to say the right thing from here. So I would have to talk to the White House counsel, or you would have to reach out to the White House counsel to talk about who is his personal lawyers.
And to button this up, the first set of documents were found in November at the Penn Biden Center here in Washington. But why did it take until yesterday, and until this morning apparently, for whoever it was to inform Robert Lausch that that final document was found? Was that because there were press reports earlier this week?
Again,
and the hope was that nobody would find out?
Again,
or was it because
there is a process, an ongoing process that is occurring? We did this by the book. And what I mean...
Stop right there. It's just a lie. She doesn't know anything. She doesn't answer any questions. It's just a lie. They're rolling them out. They're rolling them out after the election. The FBI didn't even begin to investigate it until after the election because they know how obviously double standard this appears. On the early show on CBS, Errol Barnett and Lena Zak talk about the press secretary yesterday. Cut number 7.
For a second straight day now, the White House struggling to answer any questions related to classified documents discovered at locations associated with President Biden, citing Karine Jean-Pierre there, the press secretary, simply reading a statement where she says the president was surprised by the discovery, takes this matter very seriously. The documents were inadvertently misplaced, and he doesn't know what's in them. But Lana, we've been listening here. She has not answered a single question outside of a pre-written statement by the president's lawyers.
Exactly. And continuing then to say the same thing again and again, even in response.
And that's why I don't play Karine Jean-Pierre. It's not just me. She says nothing ever substantive. She answers no question. But when Peter Doocy gets his teeth into Joe Biden, we get the clip of the year. Again, I want to play you Joe Biden and Peter Doocy, cut number 3.
Classified materials next to your Corvette. What were you thinking?
Let me, I'm going to get a chance to speak on all this, God willing, soon. But as I said earlier this week, people, and by the way, my Corvette's in a locked garage, okay? So it's not like you're sitting out in the street.
So
but anyway,
was in a locked garage.
Yes, as well as my Corvette. But as I said earlier this week, people know.
Did you notice, by the way, the elegant nature of that question? What were you thinking? That's all you have to do with Biden. That's all you really have to do is let the president and the vice president talk. And then you realize we are essentially leaderless in the United States. Well, we're not leaderless. Ron DeSantis continues to rule Florida with just great rhetoric. Cut number 15.
So, what I said was last year that Disney will no longer have its own government. Disney will live under the same laws as everybody else, and Disney will pay the debts and taxes. And that's exactly what's going to happen. So the question was always, is it going to be under state control or local control? I actually initially, when we did the bill to sunset it and we knew we were going to have to take additional action, I was agnostic between those. But then what started happening was you had Orange County saying they were going to raise people's taxes by thousands of dollars and doing this. Now, I think that was all a dog and pony show, but then I'm thinking to myself, is that really something that I want to allow them to be able to do? Do I trust them being able to handle the municipal debt and all this stuff? And so I don't have a lot of confidence in that. So it's going to be a state control board. There's absolutely...
I'm looking forward to, I'm going to put in my application with Governor DeSantis to join the new Disney supervisorial board. That would be fun. I'd like to be the king of the kingdom. Don't go anywhere, America. We got a lot today, including the brand new senator from Nebraska, Pete Ricketts. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America, to the music of David Hodges, Till You're Home, which was the principal theme of A Man Called Otto, which the fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I saw last night on our movie night. Sonny Bunch, the official movie critic of the Hugh Hewitt Show, joins me. Good morning, Sonny. I want to talk about Tom Hanks and A Man Called Otto. I'm hoping you've seen it. I don't know if you have.
I have seen it. It's going wide this weekend. It was in limited release before this, but it's hitting 2,500 or so screens this weekend. So anybody in the country who wants to see A Man Called Otto starring Tom Hanks should be able to see it.
Let me give you a quick react and then have you unpack it for us. Fetching Mrs. Hewitt wanted to go see it because she had read the book, and every women's book club in America has apparently read A Man Called Otto. I wanted to see it because I see everything by Tom Hanks. He's my age. I love the guy. I think he does a fabulous job. It's a very surprisingly touching movie, and I was greatly surprised by Truman Hanks playing the young man called Otto. It is Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson's son, I believe. And at the end of it, as we were walking out, we said, this is a grown-up movie made for people who are serious about actually talking about real-life situations. And I thought it was pretty doggone good. What did you think, Sonny?
Yeah, I liked it as well. I mean, it's a very familiar type of movie, right? And the way I would describe it, describe this type of movie is something like this, right? It's about kind of a crotchety, conservative coded, I think, not necessarily, Republican, but like a conservative coded older guy who learns both from his kind of liberal coded neighbors and community about how to be a better person, but also teaches them how to be self-sufficient and that sort of thing, right? You see something like this in Gran Torino, the Clint Eastwood movie, or the Jack Nicholson movie, As Good as It Gets. Remember that one?
Yes.
It's a similar sort of idea, right? Or even All in the Family. It's kind of an Archie Bunker sort of thing. But I liked it as well. It's funny. So the advertisements for this movie, which again, it stars Tom Hanks as Otto Anderson. He's the so-called grumpiest man in America. He's in charge of his neighborhood, keeping people from driving through the streets, and he's always yelling at people about parking permits and that sort of thing, right?
It's a movie about homeowners associations, oddly enough.
Yes, the homeowners association plays a key role in this. The ad campaign has kind of played up this whole grumpiness angle, right? And it has obscured what the actual structure of the film is, which is that it is essentially structured around a series of kind of flashbacks to his life with his wife, who has passed on now. In a series of suicide attempts. It's the feel-good suicide movie of the year, Hugh, which is I
wasn't going to mention that because that's kind of a spoiler, but go ahead.
Well, yeah. It's not a spoiler because it's in the first 5 minutes of the movie.
Yes, it is.
Again, they have not mentioned this in the ad campaign. I feel like people should at least be aware of it headed.
You're right, and the first thing we said was, if you've lost your spouse recently after a long marriage, do not go see this. My friend Richard just lost his friend Sharon. We were at their funeral last week. First comment was, Richard should not see this because it's too raw. Second comment is, he wouldn't have owned those cars with a wheelchair in the house because my wife's mother was in a wheelchair for a long time. But other than that, okay, spoilers are forewarning.
Yeah, so that's I wanted to give people a heads up on that. I won't go any further than that in terms of plot revelations. But so that's your that's the basic structure of this, right? It's a guy who needs to learn to be part of the community and teach the community to be better, and also kind of figure out how to reintegrate into society. And it's a type of movie. It has a bunch of archetypes in it. It is, but it's so good, and it transcends, what it could have been badly, because Tom Hanks is so good in this movie, and Tom Hanks is really quite wonderful.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because it's a very tight role. He has to. It's not Gran Torino. He doesn't get to be Clint Eastwood. He's Tom Hanks in a very tight role, and he's got to express a lot with a very little space to work in, including his face. And a stroke victim and new neighbor. It's about aging and grief and loss. And I thought Truman Hanks was fabulous as young Otto. Yes,
Truman Hanks is very good. It's funny, the Hanks son that gets all the news is Chet Hanks for being something of a lout. I was not even aware of Truman Hanks, but he's very good as young Tom Hanks in this movie. Asbesily, he looks the part.
Yeah.
And plays it very well. Plays almost the kind of, Aspergery, very interested in tools and mechanics and how engines work, but
very shy with girls.
Not very good with people. Very shy with girls. And the woman who plays his wife in the flashbacks, Sonia, a actress named Rachel Keller, is also very good. She is very believable as the woman who is bringing Otto out of his shell. You can see why he misses her so much, et cetera, et cetera. And look, the movie again. Again, without spoiling too much here, the impetus of the narrative drive is a new neighbor moves in across the street. It's an immigrant couple. The woman has a couple of kids. She's pregnant again with her third. And he kind of teaches her to be more self-sufficient, teaches her how to drive, and
her husband is about as skilled with tools as I am. That's a little bit of a spoiler. But this is a true story, but it was originally in a suburb of Sweden with an immigrant family, and now they've reploted into America. So it's actually based on the book A Man Called Otto, which I think half of our female listeners have actually read. Sonny, do you think they'll be disappointed by it? I think they will love it.
It was a best-selling book. It was a best-selling adaptation, or I guess translation of a Swedish novel. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for a bunch of weeks. I'm sure many of the listeners out there have read it, or if they haven't read it, have at least have friends who have read it.
Well, my wife thought it was a true story. You think it's a novel?
I think it's based on a novel. I'm pretty sure it's based on a novel. Maybe it's based on. Maybe I have not read it because I'm not in a
women's book group.
Club.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a novel. Maybe it's based on a true story. But it is a. I think. Look, you mentioned that this is a movie for grown-ups. It's a grown-up movie for grown-ups. That's a rare thing, and it's not. I would not describe this as awards bait, right? It's not The Whale, and it's not it's not Babylon or something like that. It is a pretty straightforward adult movie for adults, which is anchored by a couple of great performances, particularly Tom Hanks' performance.
I think you could see an Oscar nomination for Tom Hanks for this, because they got to have 10, right?
I don't think it's going to get a Best Picture nomination.
No, I think it's a Tom Hanks and maybe a Truman Hanks Best Supporting Actor.
Maybe. I could see maybe Tom Hanks, because the Academy does love Tom Hanks. And if this movie does decent business, which it's doing okay. It did okay in medium, small release. It was averaging $6,000 or $7,000 a screen, which is good for a movie of this sort on that many screens. So maybe if it does kind of surprisingly big business, you could see a Tom Hanks nomination. I think Best Actor is kind of a tight race this year. But you never know. And look, I would be perfectly happy with him getting.
Now, Sonny, I got to ask you the question. I was leaving Con Law 2 yesterday. I told the kids, the students, they're young men and women, I'm going to go see A Man Called Otto. If you're in my class, you got to keep up with the movies. And I said, Daniel Day-Lewis is the greatest actor of my generation, but Tom Hanks is the most beloved. And I always see Tom Hanks. and they are kind of the same generation. Do you think my statement to them is true? Greatest actor of our generation, Daniel Day-Lewis, most beloved, Tom Hanks?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is fair and accurate. You could quibble with it. Daniel Day-Lewis's big problem is that he's not in enough movies, frankly, for my taste, for to be in that mix of best actor of his generation. But he is undoubtedly a chameleon-like, going from There Will Be Blood to Lincoln in the span of a couple of years is a feat.
Yeah, we were talking about Lincoln because I was going over the history of the 14th Amendment yesterday, and I said, if you want to be in the presence of Lincoln, borrowing from a reviewer, go see Lincoln. And only one of my students, 50 students, has seen Lincoln. Isn't that wild?
I'm not surprised by that, honestly. I feel like it's the sort of movie, it's a great film. And I was a little resistant to it when it originally came out because there was a lot of, it felt like a very specific response to the Obama era that was kind of annoying in certain ways, but it really is just a wonderful, almost perfect. It may be Spielberg's last truly great 5-star movie, and I have grown to love it a great deal. And Daniel Day-Lewis's performances,
that's what I told him. If they want to be in the presence of Lincoln for 2 hours, just get a sense of the man and the misery and the grief, watch that. But back to Tom Hanks, Sea Shepherd, as opposed to Daniel Day-Lewis, Tom Hanks is always working, right?
Yeah. Tom Hanks is always working. I mean, even through the pandemic, one of the initial markers of the pandemic was Tom Hanks getting COVID. It's when the COVID became real for a lot of people when Tom Hanks had to go into quarantine because he got it.
They were in Australia, I think. He got that shooting Elvis, right? Which came out last year, which I think he's more likely to get a nomination for Elvis, frankly, than he is for this. I want to give you the last minute. I love grown-up movies for grown-ups because it used to be at least on the menu, and now they're rare, right? They're just very rare. It's a small movie set in essentially 3 blocks.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was talking with a guy who works out in Hollywood named Kevin Getz, who runs Screen Engine ASI. On my podcast, Bulwark Goes to Hollywood. That episode will be up this weekend. But we were talking about just this factor, the idea that adult movies, prestige pictures, if you want to use that term for it, they don't get a lot of theatrical play these days because everybody, the older audience, stays at home and watches stuff on TV. Either they're waiting for it to hit VOD or they're watching cable TV shows or whatever. They've been trained to kind of stay at home and watch stuff on TV. And this is the rare thing that will, get folks back out to the theaters. If you want to see adult movies for adults, go see this.
A Man Called Otto, Sonny Bunch, our official critic, and Hugh Hewitt in rare agreement. It's a movie we're seeing this weekend, A Man Called Otto. Sonny has 2 podcasts across the movie aisle, and the Bulwark Goes to the Movie. Follow him at Twitter at Sonny Bunch. Come back with me in the next segment of this Friday edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Oh, good morning, Glory, America. Boy, that's tough to watch if you are a diehard Guardians fans. Back in 2016, the Tribe, then known the Cleveland Indians, lost in the 10th inning at home in the 7th game of the World Series to the world champion Cubs. Oh, that hurts. But Pete Ricketts, I'm not going to hold it against him because the former governor and future senator from Nebraska is a good guy, despite the fact his Cubs beat my Indians. Good morning, Governor, soon-to-be Senator Pete Ricketts. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning. Thanks very much for having me on.
Now, were you at that game?
I was. It was, I got to tell you, Cleveland fans were awesome. It's a great venue, and the stadium was electric. It was a fun game.
You've got to go track down Dan Sullivan, one of your future colleagues in the Senate, because he's from Ohio originally and a hardcore Indians Guardians fan. And, if Matt Dolan runs next year for the United States Senate, and I think he is going to run, and if he wins, you and he will be talking baseball, and everybody in the Senate will want to talk to you. I think you lived at Sports Corner with your brother, didn't you, for a while?
I did, right above the Sports Corner. How did you know that?
Oh, I do my research before a brand new senator comes. You're not senator yet, right? They swear you in on next week?
No, it looks like probably January 23rd, which will be the first day the Senate is back in session.
Now, congratulations, Governor. Mitt Romney was a governor, became a senator. Joe Manchin was a governor, became a senator. It's a very different way of. Are you used to slowing down a lot? Because you used to have to make things happen in Nebraska. Now you're going to have to watch things go slow. What do you think?
Well, that's what I've been told, that as governor, there's a sense of urgency about everything you're doing because you got to make things happen. The Senate, by its design, right, our founders wanted a body that would slow things down. They didn't want politics to be whipsawed back and forth. And so that's how they designed the Senate to work. So I've got to, change my mindset with regard to how this goes. But it certainly has informed, been an important institution for us over the years to provide that stability for our country. We can certainly see that when you compare it to, say, the parliamentary systems around the world that can change governments at a drop of a hat.
Governor Ricketts, soon to be Senator Ricketts. I don't know if you've talked to Leader McConnell yet. I am a great fan of Leader McConnell. I think he saved the United States Constitution when he held open the vacancy created by the untimely death of Antonin Scalia. And I think he got Donald Trump elected. And of course, he got Donald Trump's nominees confirmed. Have you talked to him yet about what you want to do and your priorities?
Yeah, I have. As a matter of fact, I just had a conversation with him last night where he was giving me some advice. Not too dissimilar to what you said. He was urging patience because the Senate moves slower. But I've actually known Senator McConnell since I ran for Senate back in 2006, and have stayed in touch with him over the years. So I'm looking forward to working with him. And I agree with you. He is a very strategic thinker. He's really done a great job for us in the U.S. Senate as leader and minority. And I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to be able to learn from him.
Pete Ricketts, there's a story in the Post about you this morning titled Pete Ricketts' Massive Political Turnaround. And because you lost once when you ran for Senate the first time, that puts you in a category with people like Mitt Romney, John Thune. I mean, I can go back to Richard Nixon losing 1960 and 1962. Do you think it helps to have lost once before you win twice as governor and now you'll have re-election for senator in 2 years?
Well, I think it's a general rule that you learn way more from your failures than you do your successes, right? They're more painful and you tend to do more evaluation of what you could do better. And certainly my Senate loss in 2006 did teach me a lot about politics. It didn't discourage me from getting involved in it. I enjoyed the campaign. I loved getting out and meeting Nebraskans, and I learned a lot. And I think I was able to turn those lessons into successes in my race for governor. And certainly the people I met in my 06 Senate race made it possible for me to get elected when I ran for governor in 2014. So that was absolutely vital to my success in winning in 2014 was my loss in 2006.
So Nebraska's football program should be learning a lot. You working for me right now is the grandson of the legendary Joe Orduña, a Nebraska running back from the glory days. And so grandson of Joe is working for me in the studio right there. So we talk Nebraska football. Kind of a disaster. That's the natural disaster in Nebraska. What do you think about Nebraska football, Governor?
Well, I am a huge Cornhusker fan. Every little boy in Nebraska grows up dreaming of playing for the Cornhuskers. My cousin Pat actually was a black shirt back in the day. So it has been hard to see the team be so bad for so long. I'm confident that Matt Rule is going to be able to turn it around. He's got a track record of doing that. I like how you contrasted the Cubs' success with now the Cornhuskers' failure there, making sure we stay humble here. But, it's still sell out. We've got the longest running sellout at Memorial Stadium going back to 1962. So the fans are there. It's a great program. Matt Rule's got the experience of turning around, organizations like Baylor. So I'm anxious to see what he's going to be able to do for Nebraska. It's a great program. It's got a lot of potential, and I'm optimistic about the future.
So am I, and I hope that the Big Ten, I'm an Ohio State fan because I'm from the Buckeye land. I'm hoping they add Coach Prime in Colorado to the Big Ten and they add in Stanford as well. We'll see. Now let's talk about the Senate and serious stuff. What do you want committees-wise? What do you want to work on if the opportunity is presented to you by Leader McConnell and the rest of the Senate GOP caucus?
Well, one of the things I need to do is really get in more involved with some of my colleagues to figure out what's available. As coming in as the junior most member of the Senate, I'm not going to get a lot of choices, but some of the things I want to focus on are we've got to get our economy going here, and that means we've got to stop the spending, right? Old government overspending is causing inflation, Real wages have fallen. I think every year that, every month that Biden has been in office, and certainly since they passed that $1.9 trillion stimulus package. So we've got to get a handle on our spending. That's something we've got experience on here in Nebraska. I kept the rate of growth of government down to 2.8% annually, and that's allowed us to deliver huge tax relief. And that's the way it works. And this is not rocket science. You keep your spending low, you let your revenues rise, and that's how you can deliver tax relief. And that's true at the state government. We proved it. We can do it in D.C. as well. I'm also very concerned about how the big tech companies are putting their thumb on the scale for elections, especially. I think Elon Musk is demonstrating some of the things that Twitter's been going on. That's a big deal. And then with regard to national security, the Chinese Communist Party is an existential threat to the United States. We've got to take that very seriously. I started taking steps with regard to that. Actually, back in 2020, we were the first state to ban ban TikTok on state devices. We were concerned about the privacy there. And I actually closed our Shanghai trade office and moved it to Germany because I realized China was a bad trading partner. So we've got to take very seriously the fact that President Xi Jinping has said he wants to be the world dominating power by 2049. He's written that. He said it. We should take it seriously. And we can see with the things that they've done with the Uyghurs in Western China, Hong Kong, and now the noise they're making about Taiwan, that China is a real threat. So the committees that would have impact on those things would be things that would be of interest to me. We were talking about foreign relations. Obviously some of the other big committees are ones that you don't get on as a freshman senator, but I'm anxious to start making a contribution.
I'm glad to hear you bring up the Chinese Communist Party governor, soon-to-be Senator Ricketts, because I think it's number one priority and spending, and I hope if defense spending comes along, you don't cut that. But can I talk a moment about business, because you're a business guy? Yeah. The United States Chamber of Commerce has hit ground zero. No one talks to them. They've completely lost the confidence of Republicans since they backed Democrats in the election of 2020 and contributed to the Democratic majority that spent all that money. So the whole Chamber of Commerce has been discredited. If they offered you the Small Business Committee, what do you think we can do for business since the Chamber's basically, Kevin McCarthy won't talk to them. I don't think Leader McConnell talked to them. They'll come and try and see you. It's a warning. They're Democrats now. What do we do for business?
Yeah, I think actually I'm very concerned also about that trend in big corporate America of just becoming so woke and becoming so concerned about some of these, what I see as passing fad kind of issues, and not understanding that, look, we've got to create jobs for American families. Small business would be another thing that I'm very interested in because that's who creates most of the jobs in this country. A lot of people don't know that big companies don't create jobs. They do create some jobs, but really the dynamism in our economy comes from small business. It's the entrepreneur who's taken the risk to create the jobs. It's the small mom and pops that go about their business every day that make the difference in this country. And that's what we need to support. And I'll tell you, I have seen it that, big companies like regulation because they can handle it. They can hire the attorneys.
Governor, we're out of time. Keep coming back. Try and recruit your buddy Doug Ducey to run the Chamber of Commerce, please, because we need other businessmen turned politicians to run and get them to run for Senate too in 2 years. Pete Ricketts, good to see you. All is forgiven for 2016, sort of. And we look forward to Big Ten talk in the future. Stay tuned, America. Pete Ricketts will be back. Admiral, good morning, Admiral. How are you?
Doing great, Hugh. How's it going?
Great. I've got one off-the-wall question for you. Mark Montgomery is occasionally my guest. Next week, I'm going to have Mike Manazir on. Admiral Manazir has written a new book called Learn How to Lead to Win. Why are admirals, and this is a gross generalization, but it's true, and I've been in this business for 30 years, admirals are better talkers than generals. Why do you think that is?
I guess because, growing up at sea, you have to shout across the water at the other ships. No, I think that the Navy culture simply encourages more independent action, independent thought. And it does stem from the age of sail when you gave a Navy captain a set of orders and you sent him to sea and you just waited for 18 months and he came back and told you what happened. That makes you pretty independent, and that's still part of the DNA, my view, of the Navy, whereas Army generals, I think, come up in a culture where Their boss is always right there alongside them in constant communication. That chain of command is just a lot stronger, and so there's less of that independence of mind and thought. No offense to my many, many friends who are generals.
Now, I got to ask you, Learn How to Lead to Win by Admiral Stavridis. Is he part of the Stavridis?
If you look on the book, you'll see my endorsement on the cover. I think it's literally on the front cover, but it'll certainly be on the back, if not on the front. And call sign Nasty, by the way, has been someone in my orbit for 20 plus years anyway, since he was flying Hornets and I was a strike group commander. I have immense regard for him. He knows the business. He's also a great communicator, and I do highly recommend the book.
Well, I haven't gotten it yet. I ordered it yesterday on the recommendation of another Navy person, and I will be getting it and talking to him in the next week or so. Now, Admiral, let's get to the tough stuff, and this is very important. I had on Representative Chip Roy yesterday, good conservative from Texas. He says if they can't agree with the Democrats in the Senate on spending, they're going to insist on a sequestration light, 98% of the fiscal year 91. And I went into my first of many battles over you cannot use sequestration on the Pentagon. You can't use continuing resolutions on the Pentagon. It hurts our military. Would you please explain why that is in Pittsburgh Steelers talk so that everyone can understand why that is terrible? Sequestration and CRs for the defense of our nation.
Yeah, I think everybody can immediately intuit the damage that's done to frontline operational units who are moving out there. And just starting with the disruption that comes about in terms of letting contracts for logistics, in terms of ensuring that there's a full flow of all the resources that they need. So short term, there's an immediate impact, and that's before you even get to a conversation about whether you can maintain payments of any kind through the system. So short term operational, it's just like slamming the checkbook shut. And, you know, militaries are like every organization. They're out there on the front lines doing things. You simply can't do that. And then second reason is the longer term. You can't let the contracts that maintain the procurement chain. So you're in a situation like we are now in Ukraine where you've got to build more ATACMS, you got to build more HIMARS, you got to build more Harpoons, you got to build more Bradleys. Whatever it is, the Pentagon can't go out and do a contract under those kind of circumstances, and industry is not going to simply build new equipment for you because they know it's the right thing to do. There's got to be a contract. They got to pay their workers. So it's an unvirtuous circle that damages both in the short term and in the long term. And I join you in imploring the Congress not to use those kind of tools.
Yeah, you cannot use blunt force budget instruments on the Pentagon. Now, I want to move to Ukraine. There are differing reports from Russia and Ukraine on the battle around the city that's currently the heaviest fighting is occurring around a city called, what's it called here? Soledar? Yeah, Soledar. That will go on. It's a classic artillery destroy battle. Now the West, led by Finland, sending some German Leopard tanks. The New York Times reports Western tanks appear headed to Ukraine, breaking another taboo. I am glad about this, and I think we're going to school on the Russian military this way. What do you think about heavy weapons like advanced tanks for Ukraine?
I've been calling for this for months, along with many other observers. I would also add in the mix fighter aircraft, which is the other heavy piece of equipment. And you and I have talked about this. There's effectively two wars going on in Ukraine. One is the ground war. You need the heavy tanks, the medium-sized armored personnel carriers. These would be the U.S. Bradleys, even some highly mobile, reasonably armored strikers, perhaps. The Europeans make and field excellent medium-weight tanks like the Leopard. All that will influence the land war. In the air war, good job on putting Patriots up there. Let's get some F-16s or at least Polish MiG-29s into the fight. So, yeah, we're at a crucial point here where the heavy equipment at land and in the air. And oh, by the way, the addition of Harpoon missiles would be the naval equivalent of all this, and those are in the mix as well. I think we're at a pretty critical time. Let's go back to that Battle of Soledar. I think there's perhaps a bit less there than meets the eye. That's in the northern central part of the Donbass. It controls part of the approaches to a more important city called Bakhmut. Having said that, look, that front line, Hugh, is 800 miles long. So
it's so beyond our grasp of anything since the invasion of Iraq. And how does the Pentagon go to school on this, Admiral? What are they doing to assess, respond, and put the OODA loop to work here on the Russians?
Number one is using unmanned vehicles. And here, U.S. industry has really stepped up and provided quick action development and fielding of very lethal offensive drones. We saw that particularly in the early part of the war when it was the Russians moving with their heavy equipment that was simply decimated by many of these unmanned vehicles. So that's number one. Number two, and this is something where we enjoy an immense advantage, it's intelligence. It's how well we're able to translate from the big picture. Is Putin moving troops into Belarus, or is he going to come after a renewed push against Bakhmut? That level strategic intelligence, operational intelligence, really, as well as how to use tactical intelligence, particularly, for example, against Russians with their cell phones. So number two is intelligence. And then number three, we'll leave it there because we could talk an hour about this. But I think number three is logistics. It is an age-old lesson where the Russians are failing, but the West is succeeding. Keeping that flow open, along with the systems we just talked about, I think are three crucial aspects of where we've gone to school here. Some new lessons, some relearning of classic lessons.
You know, Admiral, the classic lesson about logistics, I am reading right now The River War by Winston Churchill, his first book written, and it's a fabulous book, but he talks about the logistics that Sirdar Kirchner had to establish from Cairo down past Khartoum. So 125 years ago, it was all logistics. It's still all logistics.
And it will always be thus. And that brings to mind another of Churchill's books, I'm sure you've read it, his autobiography of his early life. It's called My Early Years, a Roving Commission. But in it, there's a wonderful set piece when Churchill is on the riverboat floating down and he's cooling his champagne in the waters of the Nile. That's logistics taken to an elegant pitch.
Now, I'm not going to ask you if you cooled any champagne off the back of your destroyer. I want to know about the Russian threat to stand up a great land army. It seems, I read Stephen Ambrose's book, Citizen Soldier, years ago about the genius of George Marshall in assembling from, a standing stop, a full army that deployed around the world in about a year. I don't think the Russians can actually train conscripts in the time they need them. What do you think?
You are correct, and it's so many differences here. But first of all is motivation, leadership. Marshall's assembling an army for the great cause to respond to Pearl Harbor, to respond to Hitler. Putin is trying to drag people out of prisons to stagger onto a battlefield. So there's a huge leadership and motivational gap that would make creating such an army, particularly of citizen soldiers who were deeply, truly motivated. This is the greatest generation. In Russia, you probably have the least greatest generation. They have no investment in the state. They're not, as things go, generally speaking, willing to move to the front. We know that because the minute Putin announced conscription, somewhere around 300,000 draft-age Russian males literally sprinted for the borders. So leadership and motivation. And then second point is the Russians have not as yet demonstrated, anyway, the ability to even conduct that kind of training. That's hard work. That's like the logistics challenge. The second classic lesson of history for militaries is the more you bleed in peacetime, the less you'll bleed in war, meaning the harder you train, the more organized your training, the more realistic it is, the longer you train. Think of the Spartans. in ancient Greece, a lifetime of hardening. You can't do that in 2 to 3 months, or let alone 2 to 3 weeks, which is what these Russian conscripts are being given. He's going to fail, and it'll simply add to the stack of failures going back a year now.
One of those failures is the butcher that he sent in to be the commanding general. He got fired this week, and Gerasimov, who was the chief, it'd be like appointing Mark Milley to run our forces in Iraq if the war was hot. What do you draw from that? Do you think Putin is trying to push Gerasimov over the edge?
No, I don't. I think that there's an internal power struggle in the Kremlin. On the one hand, Gerasimov and his boss, Shoigu, the Russian Minister of Defense, Lloyd Austin, if you will, of Russia, that's the conventional stay with it, stay the course, we're going to get this thing done. And then there's this upstart leading the Wagner group, a man named Prigozhin, who is himself a lethal, deadly, mercenary kind of character. That's a power struggle in progress. Gerasimov has won this round. Look for more disturbances. Nothing good in that for Russia.
Admiral James Stavridis, thank you so much for joining us. As always, you can follow him at StavridisJ on Twitter. Thank you, Admiral. I'll be right back. America, don't go anywhere. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The first week for Kevin McCarthy started off awful, ended up great. The Jordan Committee and the Gallagher Committee stood up. It was combative Kevin yesterday, and then the Biden document scandal took over the news. How did it feel on the Hill to see it go from all bad news for Republicans to all good news for Republicans?
I think there was a sense of relief, at least, that in this first week, McCarthy stuck with everything that he promised, right? He allowed votes on legislation that conservative Republicans really wanted to see, like abortion bills, that some of the moderate members were uncomfortable with having to take votes on. So it's been so far so good with Republicans. I mean, I think the real test will be when we come into appropriation season, when it comes time to raise the debt limit, because those are the real flashpoints that conservatives were worried about. But for now, I think there's satisfaction with how that first week went.
I spent 25 minutes with Chip Roy yesterday talking about what the ask is going to be on the debt ceiling. They get one ask. He suggested either the repeal of the 87,000 IRS agents or some kind of fiscal year 91 cutback or something. Do you think the Republicans have a plan to get to a combined forces message, one message on the debt limit?
I don't think there will be one message on the debt limit, because I think that there will be some of those, members in the middle in those swing districts that are going to be really uncomfortable playing politics with the debt limit. They might join Democrats in saying, it's going to be catastrophic if the U.S. were to default on its debt. So we really need to raise the debt limit no matter what. And they're not necessarily going to be willing to engage with conservatives. I think there's some bad blood there, too, between the centrist McCarthy allies who stuck with him from the beginning and got nothing, and the conservatives who obstructed that whole process and got, a lot of concessions and pledges to do their bidding in the future. So I don't know that there's not necessarily going to be the good faith between those two factions of the Republican Party to move forward on something together. That being said, I think conservatives have made it clear that they want to get some kind of budget cut across the board in exchange for supporting the debt limit, whether that looks like something like sequestration from the past or some different kind of haircut. That's unclear, but that seems to be the direction they're heading.
Keep your ear to the ground on that, Sarah Westwood. I'm interested in the Gallagher Committee and the Jordan Committee. That's my shorthand for the new Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, the new Select Committee on the weaponization of the federal government. The former is the Gallagher Committee. The latter is the Jordan Committee. Jordan Committee got handed a gift yesterday with the part 3 of the unfolding document scandal. Who's going to be on that with Jordan? I'm hoping Chip Roy, a former AUSA, is on that, but I don't want people who don't know how to pose questions. Do you have any idea who's going to join Jordan on that committee?
Yeah, the subcommittees haven't really been figured out yet. Because it's the subcommittee of the judiciary, I believe they have to pull from that larger pool of members of the Judiciary Committee. But typically, the Republicans that tend to be on that, are better at questioning, because oversight is primarily what that committee does. So I think that they'll think carefully about the makeup of that committee. But then you also have James Comer on House Oversight and Accountability, who immediately came out with a statement after Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, appointed a special counsel and said, with or without this special counsel probe, we as the Oversight Committee are also going to be looking into this document situation. So it is a real gift. for Republicans. There's a lot of different angles here, right? I mean, the Oversight Committee is going to look into the nuts and bolts of the case. How did classified information get left at Biden's home in his office? But then the Weaponization of Government Committee has this whole other field of information that they could probe about why it took so long for this to come to light, why there was seemingly such disparate treatment between Trump and Biden when it comes to classified documents. So I think that the Republicans will get as much mileage out of this as possible and break the investigation up that way.
Sarah, do you know if the Corvette is parked in Rehoboth or at the mansion in Maine Biden manse? I have no idea because the media is so stunned and sort of like the parrot in Monty Python. They haven't woken up to the fact that Biden's got a Trump-like document scandal. I don't even know where the Corvette is parked in a locked garage. Do you?
There has been some going back and pulling old clips about he appeared on Jay Leno in the Corvette and a bunch of, different, some sleuthing that the Corvette has at times been in that garage. I mean, Biden himself said it was in his locked garage. He didn't dispute Peter Doocy when he pressed him on the documents being in the locked garage. But Biden has been so inherently contradictory when he's talked about this, right? Because the first day when he was asked about the classified documents found in his office, he said he was surprised when he was informed that there were documents in his private possession. The next day when he's asked about it, he says, of course, I know right where they are. They're in my locked garage next to my Corvette, and didn't express any surprise at documents being there. So it's unclear. Did he know that there were documents in his possession? Was he surprised? There are a lot of questions about the way Biden has handled this.
The big question is, when will the special counsel interview the president of the United States under oath, as Bill Clinton was done by Ken Starr? That's the big question. Sarah Westwood, it's always good to see you. Good Friday to you. Follow Sarah Westwood over on Twitter at Sarah C. Westwood. I want to make sure people get it. Sarah C. Westwood, thank you. Come right back, America.